Dear friends, dear fellows in this journey of exploration of Tolkien's works, thank you very much for joining me on this slight sidetrack. I will speak about the physics of the unseen in what I will insist is an entirely inappropriate application of scientific thinking. And I'm proud to misapply it. Let's start with the first part, the physics, and try to understand one thing in particular. Why are we doing physics? A lot of people would say, oh, you do physics to discover the truth. How does the world work? What is the world actually comprised of? Sorry, that's not what we're doing. Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it? But as the scientific philosopher Karl Popper showed quite emphatically, you cannot, by empirical science, discover truth. Quite simple. Some of you may be familiar with the mathematical concept of proof by induction, which relies on what they call the induction step, where you prove that if some idea is true for the number n, then certainly it is also true for the number n plus 1. You can prove that mathematically. But the world doesn't work that way. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times I drop this pen, because I cannot in any way whatsoever prove that it will fall the next time and that it will fall downwards. So that's why we cannot really discover truth in science. What we do is we try to create a model. A model doesn't claim to speak of truth. I mean, nobody really can say that, yes, we do have electrons. But if we do put something that we call an electron into our model and do the mathematics, we come up with the right numbers, or we come up with the same numbers that will be on the display when we run the experiment. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying not to say why things work as they do, but basically what will happen. We're trying to predict the things that we can observe. The prevailing model today in modern physics is what we might call the quantum relativistic model. It consists of the quantum physics and relativity. The quantum physics has what's called the standard model. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not. And relativity is, well, Einstein is famous for founding it a bit more than 100 years ago. A part of this model is that we are talking about 4 fundamental interactions. An interaction is basically how things can apply forces on each other. It's about forces. We have 4 fundamental forces. Gravity is one. We have electromagnetic force, which has loads and loads of applications. You experience it all the time. You see that is electromagnetic. Actually hearing, feeling solid matter. The reason for matter to be solid is electromagnetic interactions in the surfaces of your body and the table. And then we have the weak and the strong nuclear forces, which basically are only interesting within the atomic nuclei. I'm not going to go into details of all these numbers and figures. It's just, it looks nice, doesn't it? So he did. Thank you, one very interesting thing about gravity, unlike the others have charges that can be different kinds of charges. You know, electricity, you have positive charges and negative charges. For the strong nucleus force, you have collar charges, 3 different charges. But gravity has only one charge. You have mass, and it's always attractive. At present, for our purpose here, we will look only at gravity and electromagnetic interactions. They are important when we try to move on. Physics provides a way, a model, to try to understand things and the concept of the model itself. My aim here will be to try to provide some kind of model for the unseen in Tolkien's world. So let's dive in to Middle-earth. I'll start with the Shire, where we first meet the unseen. The first, we don't even know what it is. Frodo overhears the Gaffer talk to some strange guy. Later on, as they move through the Shire, they are overtaken by a black rider. Round the corner came a black horse, no hobbit pony, but a full-size horse, and on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in the great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots in the highest stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure sat still, with its head bowed as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise as of someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. And they meet, well, the same guy or another guy a little later. And they hide again. The sound of the hoofs stopped. As Frodo watched, he saw something dark pass across the lighter space between 2 trees and then halt. It looked like the black shade of a horse led by a smaller black shadow. The black shadow stood close to the point where they had left the path, and it swayed from side to side. Frodo thought he heard the sound of snuffling. The shadow bent to the ground and then began to crawl towards him. The black shadow straightened up and then come along the elves, and the black shadow straightened up and retreated. It climbed on to the shadowy horse and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. And the last encounter in the Shire is at Farmer Mackett's, and Farmer Mackett actually speaks with the guy. "I came from yonder," he said, slow and stiff-like. We can already know a lot about these creatures of the unseen, the Black Riders and Nazgul. They can speak, they hear, they actually answer Farmer Mackett. They can smell, they can crawl, they can climb back onto the horse. I know that we meet them in Bree, but we don't really learn anything about them in Bree, so I will skip on to Weathertop. At Weathertop, the hobbits have been joined by Aragorn, who can tell a bit more about these creatures of the unseen, and tells them that they themselves do not see the world of light as we do, but our shapes cast shadows in their minds, which only the noon sun destroys. And in the dark they perceive many signs and forms that are hidden from us. Then they are most to be feared, and at all times they smell the blood of living things, desiring and hating it. Senses too there are, other than sight or smell. And of course, we have the situation in the dell. Frodo puts on the ring, and immediately, though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. he was able to see beneath their black wrappings. They were 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing in so. And these advancing were carrying swords, one of which obviously pierces Frodo. So they do not see the world as we do, but they can smell, confirm that, they have other senses. And strangely, they become visible when you are invisible. They can see, well, not as with the world of light in the way we do, but they can see you if you are invisible. And they can hold weapons. Loads of information for a physicist in these few statements. Next, we come to the ford of Bruinen. Frodo could now see them clearly. They appear to have cast back their hoods and black cloaks. They were robed in white and grey. Swords were in their pale hands, helmets on their heads. And Gandalf later in Rivendell tells Frodo that you were in gravest peril while you wore the ring, for then you were half in the wraith world yourself, and they might have seized you. You could see them and they could see you. And later on, Gandalf muses that Frodo may become like a glass filled with a clear light for eyes to see that can. Here, new information includes water. They ride into the water. We know, well, we don't know if they drown, but they are certainly swept away by the water. We have the situation with Glorfindel, who to Frodo appears as a light-lit figure, something that might be reflected also in Gandalf's musing that Frodo might become like a jar filled with light. So there's some kind of inner light that is possibly more visible to someone who is invisible. Next is a very brief encounter, and suddenly the great bow of Lorien sang, shrill went the arrow from the elven string. Frodo looked up, almost above him the winged shape swerved. There was a harsh croaking scream as it fell out of the air, vanishing down into the gloom of the eastern shore. A very clear proof of at least one physical interaction. And just to remind, there are other examples of creatures that are outside the normal world of the living. So we'll move to Pelargir, where we have not the unseen but the dead. And suddenly the shadow host that had hung back at the last camp came up with like a grey tide sweeping all the way before it. And to every ship they came that was drawn up, and they passed over the water to those that were anchored. So they don't really bother about water getting wet. So there's something here about gravity that does not affect the dead. And of course we cannot avoid talking about Eowyn and the Witch King. Then, tottering, struggling with her last strength, she drove her sword between crown and mantle as the great shoulders bowed before her. The sword broke, sparkling into many shards. The crown rolled away with a clang. Eowyn fell forward upon her fallen foe. But lo, the mantle and hauberk were empty. Shapeless they lay now on the ground, torn and tumbled. And a cry went up into the shuddering air and faded to a shrill wailing, passing with the wind. A voice bodiless and thin that died and was swallowed up and was never heard again in that age of this world. Merry, bit neglected on the battlefield, looks at his sword smoking, with the blade disappearing. So passed the sword of the Barrow Downs, Wurga Westerness. But glad would he have been to know its fate, who wrought it slowly long ago, the North Kingdom where the Dunedain were young, and chief among their foes was the dread realm of Angmar, and its sorcerer king. No other blade, not though mightier hands had wielded it, would have dealt that foes a wound so bitter, cleaving the undead flesh, breaking the spell that knit his unseen sinews to his will. 3 short summary points. Apparently, this guy disintegrates upon death, but he had undead flesh and unseen sinews. So let's take them home for a bit of summary. These creatures of the unseen, the ring wraiths, certainly have gravitational interactions. They also have electromagnetic interactions. Otherwise, they would not be able to hold a short sword. They would not be able to uphold a cloak or even sit on a horse. Or they would not be able to see something, even if it's not the world of light as we do. They do have the ability to both detect and produce pressure waves in air, that's sound. And they have mass, an important point, both as gravitational weight and inertia. So in short, to a physicist, it is extremely clear that these are creatures of matter. We just can't see them. My solution to this is to propose a new polarization scheme. Some of you may know that light can be polarized. Normally we talk about it can be, there are different ways to describe it, either clockwise or anti-clockwise if you use circular polarization or up and down and sideways. Well, I'll propose that we have a new polarization scheme dealing with both applicable to matter and light, for which we have an hitherto unknown dimension. And we can take all the string physicists and just claim that these are rolled up dimensions somewhere. That's their dimension. They're using 10 dimensions, they're rolled up tightly and we can't see them anyway. The first is basically, this is what we know, S polarization, this is the normal state, that's all we see, all we do, it's our kind of matter. S matter, that's what we consist of, reflects and absorbs S light. So light that is S polarized is reflected or absorbed in quite the normal way by S matter. But when it comes to the other kind, which I will call U polarization, the unseen, it's basically transparent for S matter, just as S light is transparent for U matter. So U polarization the other way is the unseen state. U matter reflects and absorbs U light. If you U light, U matter, it works perfectly ordinary. That's what happens. Frodo gets, somehow we have the One Ring as a highly effective polarizer, polarizes Frodo's matter into U matter, and now he detects U light reflected off U matter. The black robes doesn't matter at Weathertop because they are S matter. They're real robes that they use to give shape to their nothingness. They're just ordinary robes. S matter. The U light that Frodo sees reflected off the ring wraiths simply isn't not affected by the robes. Now, remember, this is a model. I'm not trying to say this is true. Definitely not in any way whatsoever trying to suggest that this is what Tolkien intended. What I'm trying to do is set up a model that may help us to try to understand how this works. How does invisibility work? Not as if why or giving an explanation what is invisibility, but purely trying to understand, okay, how can we do Gedankenexperimenten, thought experiments about the unseen in Tolkien's work? It may possibly help eliminate some inappropriate readings, such as the Nazgul are dead, they're in the spirit world. No, they're not. That's the dead. They just pass over water without noticing it. That's what the dead do. That's what spirits do. These are not spirits, these are matter. And possibly, we may help physics a bit by claiming that Tolkien has explained several decades before physicists even discovered the riddle why about 70% of all matter in the universe is invisible. You could also say, well, Tolkien, Anglo-Saxon scholar, he was not a physicist, was not particularly concerned about physics. Have any of you seen his discussions about the length of the year? I'll just rest that part of the case with that. Finally, just a thank you to people whose work I have used in this. The first photo from the cave illustrating physics, particularly to Svetlina Krumova, who has lent me a high-resolution copy of her map for the Paramel Darieva, and to the fantastic illustrators whose work I have allowed myself to borrow for this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean.
I love the way that you brought Popperian falsification into a Tolkien conference. I think that's just great. And I just wonder, maybe next year, whether, if one could think about Planck's constant, if it wasn't what it is, that we might all be able to go to Middle Earth. Who knows? Anyway, I'm sure there's lots of questions. Joel?
When you talked about polarization, when Merry stabs the Witch King and you say he suddenly, the unseen and you suddenly come out with it, would you say that when Merry stabs him, much like John Berkeley, he reversed the polarity of the Nazgul?
No, I don't think I would. That, I think, is where I will have to, do what all good physicists do at times, and, well, magic.
Andrew?
Troels, thank you for excellent talk. You quoted Gandalf in Rivendell as musing to himself that Frodo may become like a glass filled with light for those with eyes that can see. Talk a little bit about that. Much later in the book, on his way into Mordor, Frodo and Sam are hiding from the Witch King, and the Witch King stops and holds his horse and stands in his stirrups, looks round, and I might hypothesise that he can see a glimmer of this clear light in his world, and that is what has arrested his attention, but he can't quite see enough of it yet for him to stop, so he goes on with his primary mission.
Yeah. And thank you, by the way, and taking that in another direction, we know that just about all polarizers are imperfect. So there might be some lingering polarization to Frodo's body that will allow this spiritual light to shine through more clearly. This spiritual light is probably both U and S polarized. We know that the Noldor, as they came back, the light of Valinor was still clear in the eyes, possibly because that was the only way that a little of the S-polarized part of the spiritual light might escape the body.
Denny, then Drogon, then behind. Denny.
Yes, I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your talk. If you look in the Silmarillion, you look at the light, of course, of the two trees, and you compare it to the light of the sun and moon. And it's interesting that the light of the sun and moon as is today is mainly perceived, is transmitted through radiation, whereas the light of the two trees is mainly it moves about by convection. Have you done any thinking on this on this line?
Not in this connection, no. I have found the idea of fluid light, particularly in the early versions, extremely interesting. But,
and of course the concept of unlight of Ungolia is interesting in this respect.
Extremely.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for the wave particle duality question. Very well.
Yes, you have this problematic point in Unfinished Tales, where Isildur covers when being invisible, wearing the ring, the light of the Elendil that he has got on his brow still shines out, so he covers it with his invisible hood, and it is extinguished by the invisible hood.
My mother may not be able to explain all of that.
Gentleman behind and then Andy.
Just into about the idea of dimension and leaking across dimensions, because currently we've got very specific physical models about different dimensions in modern physics. But the idea of somehow supernatural beings, the undead, being in different dimensions actually goes back a long way in literary history. It leads me to wonder where the actual use of the word dimensions for those things goes a long way back before the current generation of things. So I don't really know quite where those original literary ideas of dimensions came from. Was it parallel with dimensions in physics? How did it derive?
Anyone?
Open to the audience to supply the answer.
We are beyond my knowledge.
Next year somebody might like to perhaps do a talk on that. It's quite interesting.
That would be interesting.
Andrew.
Just as a kind of the question that was asked by J.R.R., just to kind of turn that on its head a bit, does your model allow for explanation of the polarity that occurs when Frodo starts to go more into the Wraith world, and he starts to see these creatures in a different, almost dimension? So in a way, a bit of reversing the polarity, in a way. But what's happening there from a physical point, from your model point of view?
In my model, the point would be that Frodo is gradually getting, his matter is getting polarized by that sliver he carries from the Morgul blade. We're not trying to explain how that works.
Okay, so we've got room for where are you? Just a couple more. Perhaps Sean is next.
Is Morgoth responsible for dark energy?
I would assume not. Dark energy makes the universe grow even larger all the time at an accelerated rate. I don't think that would have been in Morgoth's interest, but those are those are my assumptions about his political aims.
Okay, two more quick ones. You were, I think, next, and then there's somebody.
I think actually one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, well, so just in this connection, Gandalf as Gandalf the White seems to weigh a lot less, which might seem to fit in with your general notion. The eagle bears, it still says it's much easier to carry them as Gandalf the Grey.
Sorry.
Sorry, Gandalf as Gandalf the White seems to be much lighter than Gandalf the Grey, and the eagle actually says so, I'm fairly sure. That fits with the thing.
I think that's something happens, which is unrelated to this part, but he is strengthened, and perhaps even his spiritual energy gets stronger at that point. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the arguments you used to conclude that the Nazgul was of matter was that they were able to speak and hear and stuff. How does that connect to the spirits who you concluded were not of matter, who are also able to hear?
Clawed by your daughter.
The point about matter is primarily the kind of matter is mainly about mass, having gravitational interactions and having inertia is some of the key elements here. How the dead create the impression of speech, and how they hear what is being communicated to them. They may have, it would seem, some kind of weak electromagnetic interaction that would allow that.
Okay, I think any more questions perhaps catch Troels in the break, but thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Thank you.